out that how we are going to work with it. So that sort of thing we are going to do here. Right. So first of all, what we are going to do here. So we need to take care of U for utilization, right? S for saturation and E for error. So that is known as use methodology. So utilization of what? The particular application where we are, where we have hosted our application. So the particular utilization of server, the utilization of the application resources, right? So these sort of utilization we are going to check. Now saturation. For example, there is a particular server which is utilized a lot with in terms of CPU, right? So that's what we will have to take care of. Second thing, for example, the particular disk is running out of disk space. The particular server is running out of disk space. Memory is exhausted. So that is known as saturation. So first of all, we will check the utilization, that how the utilization going on and which particular component is getting saturated. That particular thing we will have to take care of. And finally, the errors. So if everything goes well, so we will have to look into the like error logs of the application. So that particular thing is known as like
errors.
Use. Use means utilization, saturation, and error. These are the things. Now the command iostat-xmt-n11. So there has to be one space in between 1. So it means this is going to print like iostat disk performance. It will check the particular disk performance every 1 second.
Okay.
So iostat is the command which we use in order to check the disk performance, right?
Okay.
Asterisk is the command. Let us say if you need to track down like what are the particular components. Just a moment.
Okay.
Okay. So asterisk is the particular command which we use in order to track that how the process is working. For example, if you need to check the system library which are being called in order to run a process, so that thing you can track with the help of asterisk command.
Okay.
Now the very first question, let's begin with this, which you have. So if we are launching an instance in real time, do we add EBS volumes? If yes, if we are adding volume, how much GB usually we add and it, and what is the volume type? See, the very first thing here is yes, whenever we launch EC2 machines, we have to add EBS volume for sure. Now that will be depending on that particular type of service which we are going to launch. So yes, definitely by default we add approx 15 GB of instance at the very initial time. Why it is so? Because 3 to 4 GB disk space is utilized by operating system itself, and whenever we plan to host an application on the server, so we need additional disk space as well. So 15 to 20 GB is good enough at initial size. But yes, if we are going to install a database, or maybe like we know very well that a very huge application we are going to run on the particular server, so it could be 200, 300, 500 GB as well. But yes, if it is application server, so 15 to 20 GB is good enough.
Okay.
And especially in that case, when we know very well that the servers are going to run behind auto scaling group, so we keep the logs in a centralized location and we keep on creating new instances. So 15 to 20 GB disk space is good enough if application is really not very heavy. Yes, just giving it a straightforward answer that 20 GB will be good enough will not be a good idea. If we feel that the logs which our application generating are really huge, so we might need to add like additional disk space into the server.
Okay.
Right. So, and when we talk about like what is the volume type here, so there are different type of volumes, like we have GP2, GP3. So ideal instance type here as of today with AWS is GP3 type, right? So we are getting like by default 3000 IOPS we are getting, and even that is cheaper than that of GP2. So GP3 is the ideal instance type, ideal EBS volume type here.
Okay.
Now, if we talk about what is Nitro,
so before moving to the Nitro instance, like how many EBS volumes do we add attached to an instance?
So like ideally there are maximum 1, 2, or 3, not more than that. Why it is so? Because see, whenever we are adding new volumes to our instances, we have to ensure the manageability as well. right? So let us say very first volume we can add for root volume, and second volume we can add for data, third volume we can add maybe for images and others. So a lot of volumes addition is not recommended actually. But yes, if we have a specific requirement, so we can add multiple, and up to 15 volumes we can add with a single EC2 machine. But obviously that will be depending on the type of EC2 machine hardware which we are going to have. For example, we cannot add 15 EBS volume with the T2 micro.
Okay, right. So like if let's say like if there is an application server like WebLogic or WebSphere or the JBoss, so like 15 to 20 GB like wouldn't be sufficient, right? So
Right. So I told you like that will be depending on the type of application which we are going to run. For example, if you are running WebLogic, so in my previous experience when I was working with one organization, so by default all the servers were created with 500 GB of disk space. But most of time it was usually observed that 300 or maybe 350 GB of disk space was remaining free.
Okay.
So which means like if we might have 200 GB of disk space for running this sort of application, that was good enough. So like see Pratap, so that will be depending completely on the particular type of logs which we are generating, number of applications which we are running on the server. So like the disk size is a combination of different analysis which we perform before adding a disk into a server.
Okay.
So there is no straightforward answer for this.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so next question here is, what is Nitro instance? So let me tell you, if we talk about Nitro instances, so AWS and like other virtualization providers are providing different type of hypervisor. So Nitro is a type of hypervisor which is providing like if you see there are different type of instances like T2, T3, T4, right?
Right.
So like Nitro is a particular hypervisor which enables you to provide fast performance, and moreover like the instances are cheaper. So that is just a type of EC2 machine. So that is a type of hypervisor here.
Okay.
Yes. So what is throughput here? Throughput is related to your EBS volumes, right? So whenever you are performing any operation on the top of any disk, so that is known as throughput here. So throughput means, we analyze the data, we analyze the performance of a disk in two ways, like IOPS and throughput. So IOPS means like number of operations, like read and write operation, which we are performing within a single second, that is considered as IOPS. And throughput means the amount of data which we are able to read within some specific span of time. So volume of data is known as throughput, and like number of operations are known as IOPS.
Okay. So how much do we usually select for the throughput? How much throughput do we opt for?
So let us say that if we are working on any application, so let us say if it is Tomcat, JBoss, WebLogic, WebSphere, so these sort of applications are there. So basically throughput is not required. Basically we have to go with IOPS only.
Okay.
But yes, let us say when we are working with maybe MySQL database, Oracle database. So over here we need not to only look for IOPS, but we have to go for throughput as well. Because let us say if there is a report where maybe 10 GB of data we have to read.
Okay.
So request is one request requires to read a lot of data from any table, from multiple tables, right? So at that moment, rather than relying on throughput only, relying on like IOPS, we have to rely on throughput as well.
Okay.
Yes. So when rather than like number of rows, number of queries, we are not bothering about what we are bothering here is we are bothering about the overall data size. So that particular like the read and write for all operations are performed with the help of throughput.
Okay.
So sample resume I'll share with you. Need not to worry about it.
I think the other day when you have shared the resume, like you just have shared like 2 to 3 resumes. If you have like other resumes like
if I do have, I'll share it with you. Need not to worry. Okay. So what happens if we enable SE Linux? So SE Linux means security enhanced Linux. That is an additional layer of security in the top of Linux operating system. For example, by default, when we talk about HTTP, so that works on port number 80. But let us say in order to enhance the security, we are going to change the port number of like HTTP to 80, right? Or maybe any other port rather than 80 or 443. So in that case, SE Linux knows very well that every single component which is enabled or which is available in your operating system, SE Linux has a particular context on it. So
Okay.
SE Linux works like along with the context. So every single file, whether it is etc, temp, where or whatever it is, so that comes with a context. So if we enable SE Linux, so definitely every single file is protected along with your SE Linux context. But if you are going to modify anything beyond the default functionality, so in that case, you will have to ensure that SE Linux contexts are also modified as per the modification. For example, you are going to run your HTTP port number 8888. So in that case, you will have to explicitly enable like SE manage is a particular command which you will use in order to enable or in order to add additional context on that particular port, that right now this port will be consumed for HTTP service.
Okay.
So SE Linux is known as security enhanced Linux.
Okay. So
Yeah.
like if we are running the Kubernetes, mostly like I will disable the SE Linux. So that's where I got this question.
Okay, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So so far I have been working with multiple organizations I've been part of. I have not seen even a single organization where SE Linux was enabled. Why it is
Okay.
so? Why it is so? Because while we are performing with microservice environment, databases, and other operating and other standard operating procedures we are following, so we have to make a lot of modification. And after making these many modifications, it will be really difficult to manage the context of SE Linux itself, because we will need a separate team in order to manage SE Linux context.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. Now, how many partition do we need to make at the time of installing? So if we talk about like cloud computing environment, so we have only one partition, that is known as slash, like root partition we want to have. But if we are installing in a virtual machine, or if we get a chance to install an operating system in your physical machine, so definitely there are a couple of partitions which are required. First of all, we need to have slash boot. That is very first partition here. Second thing is known as slash. It means that is root partition. Third partition we need to have slash home, right?
Right.
Then after we need to have one additional partition for data. Maybe let us say if we are going to use it as HTTP server, FTP server, so slash where is also supposed to be mounted on a different partition. And finally, we need to have a swap partition also.
Okay.
Swap file system. So these are like couple of file systems which we need to have in order to enhance the performance. Okay. Otherwise, if like bare minimum required, so definitely we can install our operating system with a single partition itself, which is slash root.
Okay.
Yes. So like troubleshooting boot level issues. So that will be depending on the like type of issues which we are having at the time of like boot. So it could be related to like kernel is not allowing us to boot. It could be related to grub. It could be related to some other options as well. For example, your FSW entries are corrupt, right? So these sort of things we will have to take care of.
Okay.
Yes. And like there is no such specific, like if we have any specific scenario, if we have any specific situation, then definitely I can throw some light on it. But boot level is a really vast field. So we will have to take care of these sort of scenarios, like if it is related to file system, if it is related to like your kernel, grub. So
okay.
This sort of scenario we will have to consider.
Okay.
Yes. So what is next here? What do we have?
So what is the system users used for? So we have the couple of system users, right?
Right. So we have system users. So why do we use system users? So keep this thing in mind. So whenever we install any application, for example, you are going to install HTTPD in your operating system. And what you need to do here is like you need to start your application. So by default, whenever you are going to start your application, that is started with the help of HTTPD.
Right.
HTTPD is the user, or maybe where www, or like different type of applications are initiated with different like users. So whenever we create a user, by default, that user is created with login shell, bin bash as login shell. But when we know very well that we need not to allow these users to perform any operation in our operating system. But what we need here is we just need to ensure that that user will be able to manage the application, right? So in order to manage the applications, we need system users.
Okay.
So how frequently we will use CDN? So yes, CDN is used very, very frequently. So let us say once CDN is implemented in your organization, so every single request will be routed via CDN itself.
Okay.
So first of all, like how does the flow work here? First of all, request will go to DNS. DNS will forward the request to CDN. Now CDN will ensure if the particular type of request which is coming to CDN, if CDN has the data, then it will serve from there itself. Otherwise, it will forward the request to origin. Origin means your load balancer or maybe your application servers.
Right. So like how about the Akamai, like in place of the CDN, we can use the Akamai, right?
So, well, considering this thing that can we use Akamai. So see, like that will be depending on your use case, right? So initially, if I talk about my personal experience, so last time when we started using CloudFront, so CloudFront is a particular CDN service provided from the side of AWS, right?
Right.
So we were having a couple of customers in Russia, right? But AWS was not having its own edge locations till that time in Russia region. So the customers were complaining that even after implementing CDN, they were not getting like satisfactory performance of our website.
Okay.
Then we did a POC with Akamai, and Akamai had a very had an edge location with very near to the particular premises of that particular like customer which we had there in Russia, right? So that will be depending on the type of use cases. So obviously we can use AWS CloudFront as well if we are dealing with a specific area where like AWS is going to provide you edge location, but it could be a different use case. But yes, obviously Akamai is considered to be used for better CDNing only, and even the particular options, the performance, the particular prices which Akamai is offering. So that is really great. Although that is a little costlier in comparison to AWS CloudFront, but yes, that is like better in terms of performance.
Okay.
Yes. So when do we cost optimize? Do we use the do we use that cost launching the instance? How do we analyze it? Okay. So like cost optimization, there are a couple of plans. Let me give a particular like an overview of it. So let's see, like we have RIs, like reserve instances we have, savings plan we have, right? Then after we have a spot instance, and we have on demand.
Okay.
We have these type of instances here. Not highs, we need to type in here RIs, right? So we have these type of instances. So we need to understand. So whenever we start building our infrastructure, so we initiate with like on-demand instances only. Keep this thing in mind.
Okay.
But when we start working in long-term process, so what happens here is we get a particular idea like for how long we are going to ensure. For how long we are going to use this type of instances. So let us say the particular stuff come like the particular requirement comes at least for a year, we are going to boot. We are going to run the same type of instance, right? So we can convert on-demand instance into RIs. So we are going to get approximately 60% savings here.
Right.
Right. Then after, when we know, let us say that we have converted our on-demand instance. Let us say we have approx 60 instances. For example, we have converted these 60 instances into RI. Now we are bound to it. We will have to use all the same instance type in same availability zone, same region. We will have to use for at least 1 year. But what is going to be challenge here? So RIs cannot be converted or cannot be like changed to different instance type. But let us say there are different type of RIs as well which are convertible. Let us say today is maybe 2nd of September, right? Today you converted an instance into one instance type, and maybe after 8 months you realized that only 4 months are remaining, and after 4 months you are not going to use this instance type.
Okay.
If you have a plan to change the instance type, obviously if it is production infrastructure, so you will not think a lot in terms of that yes you need this and you need that. You will not think a lot of in terms of cost. But if you are going to change the instance type from X to Y, so AWS will renew the particular contract for next 1 year. As soon as you will change the instance type, AWS will renew the contract type, right? Then after, when we are talking about savings plan, so keep this thing in mind. Savings plan gives us a particular flexibility that as and when we want. So we are not going to make a commitment. Like we are not going to make a commitment in terms of like individual instances. But yes, what we are going to do here is we are going to ensure that we are going to pay AWS some specific amount. For example, that we are going to make a commitment to AWS that we are going to pay you $10 per hour, irrespective of instance, irrespective of operating system, irrespective of any other component here, right?
Okay.
Right?
Right.
So these sort of things we have to take care of. So savings plan are just near to RIs, but we are getting a lot of flexibility here. Spot instances, you know it well. So these are on demand. These are just like on demand instances, and obviously, like AWS does not give any commitment that AWS will keep on providing these instances. These can be terminated at any moment. These are a lot of cheaper, but yes. There is no commitment for sustainability. Only one instance is well. So when we start creating our infrastructure, so we have to begin with not necessarily, but yes, most of organizations begin with on demand only, because we do not know that how long we are going to use these instances for, right?
Yeah.
This is
So
now,
when do we use the spot instance exactly?
So when
like
let us say when we are using our application inside auto scaling group, so we can decide we can use launch template there, and we can define like if we are going to run overall 10 instances, so 7 will be spot and 3 will be on demand.
Okay.
So like we can use in combination with on demand and spot.
Okay.
So, at least 3 instances will be up and running all the time, because we are going to be on demand. So if any spot instance goes down, so our AWS auto scaling group will spin up once again, but our end users will not be impacted completely. Like there will be no complete black outage on that.
Okay.
With the help of on demand. So that is how it is going to work. Okay, if we are implementing a AWS WAF, and let's say performance testing is ongoing on my servers, will it block at that time? So when we are talking WAF and Shield, so yes, if any performance testing is going on your servers and you have explicitly not whitelisted the IP addresses from where the request is going to come, it will block your request.
Okay.
Redis cache, will that be in private subnet, and what instance do we need to use here? So Redis is going to be memory specific, so you can use either M type or maybe R type of instances here. And yes, that is supposed to be kept in private subnet, because Redis is the particular server which cannot be exposed to end users directly.
Okay.
So etc sysconfig network script if cfg eth0. This is a particular file where we specify the IP address, network, gateway, DNS, and other stuff related to a LAN card on a server or on a local machine as well.
Okay, so for any instance, like let's say if you're launching an EC2 instance, so like a network card will be assigned to an instance, right? So like how many network cards can we assign to an instance?
So once again, that will also depend on the type of EC2 machine which you have. So let us say if it is like network performance, you can add up to 5, 6, 7 LAN cards here. But end of the day, whenever you are talking about like how many, so there is no specific number. You can add 1 to like up to 10 or 15 as well. So that will be depending on the type of hardware you are going to use.
Okay.
So why do you use network load balancer before database? So over here, we need just to like bifurcate the part. We need to distribute the load among different database instances. And we are not going to ensure the particular protocol, the headers, and a specific type of query here. So we are not analyzing the like application type here. We are not analyzing like request headers. We are just like routing the particular load. That is why we use network load balancer before databases.
So the question is like, for the database, so let's say like the application is getting connected to the database using the data sources. Right. So like, I mean, like you said, like, the network load balancer has to be used before the load balancer, and the proxy, MySQL proxy server has to be used in between the application and the database. So is it that necessary?
Okay, so let me tell you, let us say you have master database and you have slave database. So how you're going to ensure that your, let us say currently you have one master and one slave, but going forward you have one master and 5 slaves. How you're going to ensure that all the select queries, like all the non-read queries are going to go to master and all like read queries are going to your slaves. So for that, we need to, rather than calling it network load balancer, we should call it like proxy SQL.
Okay.
So proxy SQL is a particular component which we need in order to place. Let us say we have master. So this particular proxy SQL is going to work as a like we have Nginx before our Tomcat or before our JBoss servers, right? So this is just going to redirect the traffic. This is not going to hold any sort of data information, but this is going to be used in order to redirect the traffic. If it is select query, it will go to slave. If it is write query, insert, alter, delete, update, and whatever, it will go to your master.
So like we are going to install the proxy SQL in an EC2 instance, right?
Right.
Like okay, like what instance do we usually select? Like
so we can use C type of instance because over here we are performing only compute.
Okay. Do you have any kind of documentation for the proxy SQL so that I can go ahead and read it?
So these are readily available over internet. If you want, I can show you that.
Okay, yeah, please.
Just check it out once yourself. Otherwise, let me show how does it look like proxy SQL.
So like, do we need to configure anything on the proxy SQL server?
So yeah, this is the particular high performance open source MySQL proxy. This is the particular component which you need to configure. Over here, you will have to define the particular server ID and the type of request you are going to have here. So this is open source.
Okay, okay.
Yes.
All right, yeah.
Okay. So do we use Bastion host in all the organizations? So it is not necessary that we use Bastion host in all the organizations. Sometimes what happens, so Bastion host is such a word, or you can call that jump server as well sometimes. So you might get to know about jump server. So Bastion host or jump server are such a component which are used in those organizations only where VPN servers are not available. Or if VPN is available and you need to have like high availability of your server, so in that case you can use Bastion host. So first of all, you will create a Bastion host you will create a server with public IP address in your AWS infrastructure, or maybe in GCP or Azure as well. And first of all the users will connect to this server before connecting to remaining servers which do not have public IP address.
Okay.
So it is not mandated that all the organizations are supposed to use Bastion host, but yes, it is recommended that if any VPN server goes down and you are performing any very critical operation, so you will not be depending on your VPN only. You can directly connect to your jump server with the help of public IP address.
Just like a standby, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So do we configure ALB for cross region? So like load balancer does not support cross regions. For that, we have to rely on AWS Route 53. So yes, cross availability zone, if we're talking about, yes, we can use configure application load balancer, but it does not work for cross region because application load balancer is a regional service and you are talking about cross region.
Okay.
So what security policies are we using in ALB now? So obviously like AWS. AWS load balancer allows us to use security groups for sure. Like we can use security group with our application load balancer, and aside to it, we can integrate maybe WAF and Shield as well with our load balancer.
Okay.
So how usually we select spot instances? Also, do we select spot instance in auto scaling group? So usually the very first statement is definitely as and when we have a plan to create auto scaling group, only in that case it is recommended to use spot instance. Let us say that maybe the server is working in your development environment, your developers and your QA team is working on that, and suddenly that instance goes down.
Okay.
It will be of no use because the server is down, testing, development, everything is stopped. But yes, if let us say you are using the servers in order scaling group. So let us say you are using 3 servers in that. So you can have 2 spot and 1 on-demand instance. So at any given point in time, maybe your servers, your users might feel, like feel a lot, like a little slowness, but definitely like infrastructure will not go down.
Okay.
Slowness will be there. So like spot instances are supposed to be used in a combination of on-demand and auto scaling, on-demand and spot inside auto scaling.
Okay.
Okay, so what IAM role do we select while launching or when server is running? So see, like IAM role is such a component which we can add at any given point in time, maybe at the time of server, like at the time of instance creation, or maybe while the instance is running. Then as well, we can associate any IAM role. Moreover, we have to be very, very specific. We have to be very, very selective at the time of IAM role selection or addition. And why it is so? Because whenever we are going to select IAM role, we have to be very sure that what operation we are going to perform after associating this IAM role.
Okay.
But the answer to your question specific here is that we can associate this at any given point in time.
Okay.
Okay, how to generate a compute report for auto scaling group? So see, like CloudWatch alarms are there. We can have, like, we can generate we can get multiple reports here, maybe related to performance, maybe related to like number of healthy hosts. Maybe you can check like how many instances have been terminated within the last 24 hours. So these sort of reports you can generate with the help of AWS CloudWatch.
Okay, like if I need it like in a CSV format.
So yes, see, like once you are running a JSON, once you are running a query in your AWS CLI, you can generate in any format.
Okay. So like, can we do it with the Boto3 as well?
Yes, definitely. Boto3 is a library which you can use in order to extract the alarms, like alarm conditions of CloudWatch.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So can we create multiple alarms for auto scaling group? If yes, if any alarm on the trigger, does it launch an instance? So like obviously we can configure multiple alarms, and yes, it is not always necessary that when an alarm is triggered, so new instance will be launched. So like that is known as not, rather than calling it as alarm trigger, that is known as like an event. So an event can be responsible to create new server or can be responsible to remove a server from auto scaling. But yes, if you are talking about like scale in only, so yes, as and when any situation meets, let us say load average, number of requests per server, response time from per target group, so per target in group, so definitely that is going to add new server.
Okay.
Yeah, in real time, do we enable delete production on load balancer? Yes, we have to. Ideally, we are supposed to enable delete production. Why it is so? Because sometimes what is going to happen if we select multiple load balancer? Maybe like we are in cleanup process and we might select a wrong load balancer. So at the time of load balance selection, we have to give the name of that load balancer, and we should cross verify with like the particular name server which we are having, maybe the particular Akamai and other components as well, if we are using that load balancer anywhere. Moreover, we should check the traffic reports as well.
Okay.
And how much traffic this load balancer is serving, which we are going to delete.
So like how to generate the traffic report?
CloudWatch.
CloudWatch.
So the monitoring section of that load balancer shows all the things here.
So I have another question, like, I'm not sure whether I'm asking the right question or not. So like, if we are using the load balancer, let's say you heard about the big IP, right? The FI big IP.
That VIP, virtual IP address.
Not the big IP, like the firewall and the load balance that it does.
Okay.
The VIP. Yeah. Yeah. So like if we are using the load balancer, can we also use the big IP?
So like in case of AWS, that is not recommended, that is not required. Why is so? AWS load balancers are like auto scalable, and these are really performance servers. So we need not to worry about the performance. So for example, that if you are going to use AWS load balancer for such an application where million of hits per second are already coming in, and now you are going to opt AWS load balancer. So there is a particular term known as pre-warming. So pre-warming of a load balancer is required. So you can raise a request with AWS that, okay, this is the particular load balancer which we are going to use, and we are expecting maybe 10 million hits per second on this load balancer. So what AWS team will do for you here is they will pre-warm a load balancer. It means they will readily prepare your load balancer on such a hardware where 10 million hits per second can be handled. So no other components is required in terms of AWS.
Okay.
Okay, so what is scenario for network load balancer? So network load balancer are recommended whenever you need high throughput and low latency. So network load balancer are preferred. Moreover, when you need not to go for HTTP or maybe like HTTPS like load balancing, so at that moment you can opt your network load balancer.
Okay.
Migration from on-prem to AWS, any video link? So yes, I can share a couple of links with you. So need not to worry about. I'll share a couple of links with you, but let me tell you, this is just not a theoretical point. Reason being, those guys who have been working for quite some time on AWS, because see, like it's not one or two servers which we are going to migrate. It is maybe like 1,000 of servers we are migrating. So that becomes a shared responsibility of the particular like team which is going to do migration for you. And maybe like if you are planning to migrate like 1,000 of servers, so even AWS team can offer this thing to you for free. So they have tie up with multiple vendors. They will make you connect to their vendor, and they will do it for you for free. Now, when it comes to migration phase, so they will analyze. They will suggest you maybe like whether they are going to lift and shift for you. They are going to recreate the infrastructure. They will decide the priority. They will decide the criticality of it. They will decide the size of data center. And now there will be a particular component known as like responsibility, like SOW, statement of work. So they are going to decide like what particular component you will do and what component they will do. For example, they will create all the servers for you, but right now when it will come to the particular configuration of your application, that part you will have to manage.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Yes. So it is not like straightforward answer is not there. So like load balancing, load, which category it should be like in like S3 AI Glacier. Okay. So when we are talking about like load balancer log, so ideally this should be in your S3 IA, like infrequent access. It should be there in, and after like maybe the particular commitment which we have with our security team. So after that, the log should be moved to Glacier.
Okay.
What is trusted advisor?
So
trusted
what
advisor,
is the like the time frame?
So
Any
like
time frame?
ideally for first 90 days, we are supposed to keep our data online. Online means as and when required, we should be able to we should be able to read the logs as and when required. But after 90 days, we can put the logs into Glacier.
Okay.
So these are the ideal practices here.
So like where exactly you can see the load balancing logs?
So as and when you will enable the load balancer log, so by default, these logs will require like at the time of saving the setting. So you will have to provide one S3 bucket location you will have to select,
Location.
and inside that S3 bucket you will be able to see the logs.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. So what is trusted advisor? So trusted advisor is a particular component which is enabled with your premium account only. If you are paying bill for support, so only in that case you are going to utilize the AWS trusted advisor. It is going to suggest you related to security, infrastructure, high availability, and performance.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think then you can skip the 27th one then. Yeah.
Okay, so while creating an AWS account, do we choose business account? Yes, the answer is yes. So when we are creating production accounts, so ideally we are supposed to select the business support as well. Why it is so? Because what if something goes wrong? So we cannot say that we do not have production support. That is why we are not able to resolve the issue in time. Moreover, whenever we are going to onboard any of our customers, so like they ask us that do we have any production support enabled from the particular CSP like cloud service provider. So yes, we have to be very, very like responsive in that particular case, and we need to select business support.
Like what is the premium cost for that business account?
So like there is no such specific amount. For first $10,000, AWS will charge you 10% of it means $1,000.
Okay.
If your bill is going to be $10,000, so like 10% of 10,000 AWS will charge, and remaining amount whatever it is, AWS is going to charge you 7% of it.
Okay.
Above and beyond of $10,000, AWS is going to charge you like 7% of your entire bill, excluding first $10,000.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Like first 10,000, 10%, remaining amount 7%.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. So how do you pull one server from target group and deploy application and continue with others? So obviously there is a particular option within AWS Autoscaling group where you can put your server on standby. After putting server on standby, you can do the deployment on that, and once again you can set that server in service.
Okay, like, do we have any link for that video link?
Yes. I'll share it with you.
Okay.
Termination policy in Autoscaling group, oldest one. So initially, I would not call it initially. So like in between, AWS started a particular policy when, let us say, there were 50 servers in Autoscaling group and we were doing some deployment on that. So AWS was giving some sort of template option that we can select a particular policy, like which instances are supposed to be terminated. But right now, this particular question will not be there. Why it is so? Because right now, rather than calling it oldest instance, AWS has given a particular option known as refresh instance. So all the instances, whether it was created 10 minutes before or whether it was created maybe like 3 days before, it is going to refresh all the instances.
Okay.
Because oldest instances was the particular case when AWS used to charge on hourly basis, but right now even AWS is charging on minute basis. So that doesn't make much difference. So rather than this question will be there, so obviously like refresh instance is going to be there.
Okay.
So what are the real-time issues on EC2 machine which we see on daily basis? So yes, like sometime it is stuck in a status check, sometime, and obviously whether it is status check or maybe instance check failure, like hardware failure. So these are the issues which are fixed from the side of AWS. Sometimes we are not able to log in. Sometimes the instance is not booting up properly, right? Sometimes like SSH issues are there. So these sort of like usual issues we face on day to day. And
where exactly we can see that log?
So there's a particular component on AWS panel, like when you select an instance, so over there, get system, the instance settings and get system logs or get instance log. So these are the two settings there.
Okay.
Yes, you can see the logs there. Who is going to write the pipeline script and Jenkins job? So obviously DevOps team will be responsible for it in most of cases, but yes, there are some specific cases where you can Jenkins, not Kings. So wherein you can take help from your developers as well. But yes, DevOps team is going to be responsible for it in major cases.
Okay.
Do we use default VPC in real time? So the answer here is no. So if we are very confident and we know very well how to set the things up in real time, we know very well. So definitely it is not recommended to use a default VPC because sometimes, let us say you are going to use multiple VPCs, and if you see, so there is a particular like CIDR value 172.31.0.0/16. That is the default value of most of VPCs. So VPC peering will not be a possible thing.
Okay.
So that is why we need to have custom IP address range in order to configure VPC. So what is the network interface, and can we attach multiple network interfaces to each machine? If yes, like what cases do we attach? So yes, we have discussed this earlier as well. So that will be depending on your instance type, instance size, and the use case. So use case here, it could be, let us say you have EC2 machine wherein you are going to say that you are going to host multiple websites on one EC2 machine, and you are going to commit your end user that only one website is running on one IP address. Server is going to remain same, but IP address is going to remain different, right? So in that case, what is going to happen? You can commit your customer that we are running one IP address, we are using one IP address for one website. So multiple website can be hosted on the same server. The data of multiple website can be kept on the same server, and you can have like IP-based virtual hosting.
Okay, right.
So that is a use case here. Endpoint and endpoint services, these are the particular services which are provided or which are used inside your AWS VPC itself, right? So let us say you have your such a subnet, such a component of VPC you have, wherein you are going to use, let us say that you want to copy your data from EC2 machine to S3, and even the particular S3 machine does not, your EC2 machine does not have internet access. So in that case, you can use your EC2 machine, your endpoint or endpoint service. So these are the particular components which are mostly used in order to secure, or moreover, let us say that rather than transferring the data over internet, so you can use endpoint service or endpoint here.
Okay.
So do we create all environment in one region? So ideally not. So we should have different regions for different environment. Otherwise, the ideal way here is, if we, let us say we don't want to go out of India, so we should have different accounts. One account for prod, one for dev, one for QA, or maybe some other. So like different account we should have for different environment.
Okay.
And how does the dev QA production account bill be managed? So obviously we should have a particular master account, and this for bill. So we should have a master account for billing purpose only. Cost optimization.
Okay, like who is going to like manage the bills exactly? Like, is it the project manager or
so like when we are talking about cost optimization, so manage bill is nothing like whenever there is an invoice, we download it and we share it to our finance team. And
okay,
rather than doing this activity like every month, what we can do here is we can create a particular user for our billing account as for billing team. They will have a read-only user. They will be able to download the report directly from the particular account, and they will keep on paying it.
okay, fine, all right.
So cost optimization. So cost optimization is not like monthly activity or maybe quarterly activity. This is an ongoing activity. So every single week we have to ensure that if any server is there which is not utilized properly, if the particular infrastructure is not being managed properly, there are some resources which are like sitting idle, this and that. Security, like obviously we can use multiple tools, like we can use Web, Shield, maybe Glue, Inspector, and Trusted Advisor. So multiple tools are there which you can use in order to analyze the security of an environment.
So the trust advisor and the guard duty, we have the trust advisor and the guard duty, right?
Yes,
So,
Trusted Advisor, as I told you, so Trusted Advisor is going to advise you for four major components like cost, performance, backup, and security.
so like what exactly the difference between the optimization and the trust advisor? If you are using the trust advisor,
So
it would
Trusted
also.
Advisor is going to give you advice in order to do optimization.
Okay.
And optimization is such a thing which you have to perform manually.
Okay, yeah, I got it.
Okay, so S3 and VPC is missing.
Yeah, I think like the videos are missing for the S3 and VPC.
Okay,
And the Route 53.
I'll share it. You not to worry about. And Route 53, so even these are available on YouTube as well in very detail. So I'll share the link with you. Need not to worry about. So deploy Git access in Git. So whenever we are going to integrate Jenkins with Git, so at that moment, what we have to perform here is we have to create we have to first of all start Jenkins service in a server. Then there is a user created, which is known as Jenkins. We generate SSH keys for that user, and those keys are deployed inside Git.
Okay.
Okay, so how do you revoke access when your developer is leaving organization? So there are two ways. First of all, the manual way here is like we can remove the users, because obviously we have a checklist that wherever we are providing access to developer, so we have a checklist, and we have to complete the checklist, because as and when a user is going to leave the organization, so the HR team is responsible to share the notification at the very final day of that user leaving, right? So we have to perform the checklist. We have to delete the user manually. And second way here is we can like integrate our AD, like Active Directory.
Okay.
We can integrate our Active Directory with our server, right?
Okay. Right.
And as and when the particular user is leaving, so IT team is going to remove the user. So by default, the user will the access of that user will be revoked by default.
Okay.
So what type of instances do we usually use in DB? So that will be depending on type of database. So ideally, these are R series or M series.
R series or M series. Okay.
R5 or M5.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So what is the use of increment to ANI, like Elastic Network Interface? So this is same like adding new IP addresses to your EC2 machine.
Okay.
So DB, what S3 storage class do we use when take backup? Company standard for now. Okay. So let me tell you, as I told you earlier as well. So as and when we take backups, so these backups are stored in a particular data store where we can read the data in real time, right? So like data has to be kept in live, like live data store. Maybe like that could be actually standard storage, IA, or maybe single zone IA or whatever. But After 3 months, you can keep the data into Glacier as well.
Okay.
But for first 90 days, the data is supposed to be kept on live environment or maybe on S3 standard storage.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, for the Ansible modules, can we modify EC2 VPC as EC2 NACL? Then what is the use of Terraform? So see, both are going to be used. You can modify, and in fact, rather than using this tool, you can use Boto 3 as well. So that is going to be depending on your use cases. Let us say if you are dedicatedly working on like new infrastructure provision again and again. So in that case, what is going to happen here? In that case, what is going to happen here? So if you are managing multiple cloud platform, maybe GCP, maybe AWS, maybe Azure. So in that case, what is going to happen? You are going to use Terraform. But if these are very small and minor changes, so you can use Ansible as well.
Okay.
So that is going to be depending on use case only, right? So
Right.
I hope we have covered all the questions which you have. But yes, like couple of things here, like sharing video and others, these are remaining. I'll do that, right?
Okay. Yeah. So the other thing is like, I mean, I haven't covered the Docker and the Kubernetes and the Terraform yet. So I will walk through with the videos once. Like I think the Kubernetes, we do not have any kind of videos.
So like for Kubernetes, I do not have any videos, but yes, like we